So many cruel stories about Rome and its punishment in ancient days have gone around, and crazier ones have even evolved as people found the topic an interesting one and added extra details that weren't there before. It's said that whoever killed their parent in ancient Rome was given the cruel punishment of the sack. How true do you think this was? The whole of Roman history is filled with stories of cruel punishments that befell any citizen who broke the law. The tales were so terrible that they served as a warning for the coming generations. Some of these punishments may have evolved in stories, some were grossly real, and the cruelty of some has been greatly reduced. Sewn into a donkey. This is one insane Roman punishment that was used during the Roman Empire. A donkey will be taken and killed. Then its belly will be sliced open and all the intestines and bowels are removed. Then the accused person will be stripped of all their clothing and will be stuffed into the donkey's belly. The belly will be stitched, but the accused head will be outside to prevent suffocation and to prolong the accused person's suffering. The donkey's body is left in the sun and it will start to decompose with the living person inside it getting cooked by the heat. Maggots will crawl over the accused person and vultures would keep pecking at the animal's decaying bodies. The victim of this torture usually prayed for death. However, the death came very slowly. Obey your father. One of the insane punishments used during the Roman Empire was obey thy father. The Roman Empire was grossly patriarchal and hierarchical. In Roman families there existed a thing called a Roman paterfamilias, which refers to the family's oldest living male, and this son had the power to kill someone within his household with impunity. The spread of this power gave the male power over those who lived physically under their roofs, and even the families of brothers, sisters, nieces, and nephews as well. To use the power justly, the child or person in question in the household would need to have committed a crime against the state. In 63 BC, Aulus Fulvius was killed by his father for his involvement in the conspiracy of Castration. Whenever the use of power was justified, the male with the power was left alone, alive and within the community. However, if the use of the power is considered to be unjust, then the male with the power could be tried and exiled. An example of this was the senator Quintus Fabius Maximus Eburnus, who killed his son for his dubious chastity. But punishing a crime of a sexual nature was not seen as the proper use of a father's power by the Roman Empire. So Quintus himself was tried and exiled. Being a slave brings punishments. In ancient Rome, the rule of thumb was that slaves could be tortured freely. It was so prominent to the extent that any free man that was accused of a crime can have his punishments passed on to his slaves who would take it in his place. The slaves got tortured in place for their masters. The slaves were severely tortured even to the point of death so that a verdict can eventually be reached. There were many loopholes in the laws of the Romans, and the elite exploited each one of them. A watery and very crowded grave. There was a very insane punishment for any member of the society who committed the crime of parricide. Parricide refers to the crime of killing your father, mother, or relative. Anyone caught to be guilty of such a crime was subjected to the punishment of the sack, which is called poena calli in Latin. For this punishment to occur, the criminal would be put into a thick leather sack containing 4 animals inside. The animals: a snake, a monkey, a rooster, and a dog. After the person is put into the sack containing animals, the sack is then sewn shut and the person is thrown into a river. In 101 BC, Publicius Malleolus killed his mother and was sewn into a sack and thrown into the sea. The more common punishment for the crime of parricide involved feeding the offender wild beasts. The animals are talked about in a passage from the writings of the jurist Molostinus, who lived in the middle of the 3rd century AD, and it stated that the penalty of parricide, as prescribed by our ancestors, is that the culprit shall be beaten with rods stained with his blood, and then shall be sewed up in a sack with a dog, a rooster, a snake, and a monkey, and the bag cast into the depth of the sea, that is to say, if the sea is near at hand. Otherwise, he shall be thrown to wild beasts, according to the constitution of the deified Hadrian. It's widely believed that the main purpose of this law was to scare people off rather than being enforced. It's more believed that people were sewn into the sacks and thrown into the rivers without the sacks containing animals. Slavery for not showing up. The Roman authorities took their census very seriously. In fact, maybe they took it too seriously. Taking part in the Roman census was very compulsory for every individual because the Roman Empire needed a complete record of the citizens and their properties so that they can properly account for taxes. In the 1st century BC, historian Dionysius of Halicarnassus wrote that the 6th king of Rome, Servius Tullius, had decreed that any person who didn't participate in the census would lose all their property and get sold off into slavery. Another account from Livy was that citizens who don't participate in the census were threatened with death and imprisonment. Being fed to wild hogs. There was a very insane punishment where young women who were no longer virgins were fed to wild hogs. Before this happens, the lady was first given to gladiators, and then she is publicly stripped and her belly is sliced open so that her intestines are outside. Then barleys are stuffed into her and she's sewn back together and then given to wild hogs who will then tear her apart. Public castration. During the times of the Roman Empire, there were certain privileges attached to a certain type of people, the higher class. People in the higher class can have sex with people of lower ranges. For example, the emperor would get it on with anyone he wanted. A general could make a move on a lieutenant or common citizens, and soldiers could go after common citizens. However, climbing up the social ladder in the Roman Empire was highly forbidden. If a common citizen decided to try to penetrate an unwilling soldier, the punishment was public castration. If the soldier willingly allowed the common citizen to have sex with him, he would be publicly disemboweled. It was easy for anyone to accuse a man of breaking rank or willingly giving in to penetration by a man of lesser status, and thus putting both the offender and victims in danger. Buried alive. During the reign of Emperor Nero, Nero took great delight in having people buried alive. He exclusively saved the punishment for virgins who broke their vows of chastity. One time, Nero forced himself on the priestess Rubria, and after that he had her entombed in a small cave and left her there to die. Nero took it further by causing the victim to dig his own grave by themselves, and a sharp stake was placed inside the grave while the person was bound and pushed into the grave. If the person committed a minor crime, they are pushed so that their heart is pierced by the sharp stake, and anyone who is convicted of a major crime was pushed so that the sharp stake wounded them severely. After this, the person was then left to die in serious pain, or would be buried alive in the grave. Cut in half. In Roman belief, death isn't the punishment, it's a release, it's the torture that's a punishment. Once a time, Emperor Caligula ordered that a senator be slit open. When the victim survived, the emperor ordered that his eyes be removed and later that his body be cut into half and torn into pieces. In the ancient Roman Empire, death was only allowed after the victim had experienced a huge amount of pain and terror. A barrel filled with milk and honey. One insane punishment used by the Romans was putting someone into a barrel and locking the barrel. This punishment was used to kill and torture Christians during the reign of Emperor Domitian. Christians were cleaned with honey and milk forced into a barrel. When this they need force-fed parasite-ridden food, and also the barrel is closed shut. The parasites can then feast on the withins of the person, and the body of the person will begin to rot from the inside outside after a fortnight of this torture. The victim will then die and become a martyr. The Romans during the ancient ages had the craziest sets of punishments for almost everything. They believed that death was a relief and escape from punishment, and so they looked for the best ways to torture a person and keep them alive for a long time as they suffer in severe pain.